Welcome and good morning. We're waiting for a few people to join us. I'm really pleased to be here and welcome you to AI for Municipalities. My name is Hillary Brill, and I work with the Institute of Technology, Law, and Policy at Georgetown Law School. And the Institute convenes thought leaders, academics, and experts like those from today's panel to pursue cutting-edge issues at the intersection of technology, policy, and the law. The Tech Institute recently launched Georgetown's Global TechNet program, and it's a working group of international academics and thought leaders who specialize in technology, law, and policy research. The Global TechNet cohort has joined us today and is one of our co-sponsors, and they explore public interest technology and social issues with a special focus on diverse global voices that generally were not heard as easily before the pandemic, but the pandemic has brought us technology that has brought us together. Today's program series is co-hosted by the Yale Information Society Project, and we are so grateful and appreciative for all of the work that the Yale Information Society Project has done to help make this happen. The Yale ISP is Yale Law School's intellectual community of interdisciplinary scholars who also explore issues at the intersection of law, technology, and society. But today, Georgetown and Yale are launching AI's Governance Symposium series with our first event. So today is a first event, a first episode, a pilot episode, so to speak, AI and municipalities for our general AI and governance. We will discuss over a 4-part series, the benefits and risks of AI, as well as the current landscape of policies and proposals governing municipal adoption of AI today, but other issues in the future. We'll imagine new ways to maximize the benefits and minimize the risks of technology that will power the 21st century. Georgetown and Yale will host future events like the AI Ethics and Corporate Responsibility event coming on May 7th, and an AI from International Perspective event on May 28th. More events are likely to follow in this series, so please sign up if you haven't signed up for all of them. Now, I wish to give a special thank you to Nicholas Guggenberger and his staff from Yale ISP for working side by side with us on this rich and robust series. I particularly want to thank Georgetown's non-resident fellow, our Institute fellow, Kyoko Yoshinaga, who was essential in planning this program and the entire symposium series. And I also want to give a thank you to Professor Anupam Chander, who is the faculty lead of Georgetown's Global TechNet, and to Prince Albert, Georgetown's graduate OPEX fellow. All of you have made today possible. With that, I want to welcome our esteemed moderator, Professor Sheila Foster. She is a professor of law and public policy at Georgetown's Law Center and the McCourt School of Public Policy. She researches in many areas of law, particularly state and local government. Her most recent work explores questions of urban law and governance, which makes her a perfect moderator for today's interactive series on AI municipalities. So she looks at it through the lens of the commons, exemplified by her article, The City as a Commons, at the Yale Law and Policy Review. Sheila, thank you for starting our journey on the AI and governance series. Thank you everyone who has come today to join us. This is not your general webinar event. This is actually more interactive, and we welcome conversation and we welcome discussion. And with that, Sheila, please start us off.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. And I just want to remind everyone before I get started that the session is being recorded. And again, at the end of the formal speaking session, I will moderate questions, and I'll probably kick the session off or the Q&A off with my own questions. But for now, I want to get us started with just to frame the issue a little bit. According to a recent report, this year, the spending on smart cities is likely to reach more than $130 billion. Investment made to build and strengthen advanced infrastructure and smart systems in local governments and cities in general. So artificial intelligence, which is part of the smart cities framework and platform, is expected to play a big role in equipping cities with advanced features that make it better for all of us to live, walk, shop, and enjoy a safe and more convenient life. Artificial intelligence promises to shape many facets of city life, including city administration, sanitation, traffic congestion, security surveillance, parking management, waste and disposal systems, reduced emissions, among other areas. So the use of artificial intelligence in smart cities can be life-changing if implemented in the right spaces and the right way. But there are multiple challenges in making cities smart and in using artificial intelligence. And I'll just mention a couple. First, these technologies that make our lives better also gather huge amount of data from AI cameras or the security systems or air quality or crime rates, right? So one challenge is the privacy and data security implications of these technologies. Another challenge is that some of these technologies seem, frankly, scary to many people because of a lack of understanding of how they work and what their purpose is. And this can engender a lot of distrust. So do local leaders need to be able to explain to their residents and constituencies the benefits of these new tools? If so, how do you couch these benefits in terms that go beyond the efficiency gains of these technologies? And how do you engage with communities on what these tools can and cannot do and what the benefits are to various communities? So I'm looking forward to a robust discussion today about privacy, security, trust, and transparency dimensions of the use of artificial intelligence in cities and other local governments, and how we can address and balance, right, all of the benefits and the cost of these technologies that will be used across a diverse group of functional areas in cities. Okay, so I'm going to introduce the speakers in the order that they will speak, and we're very pleased today to have Dr. Cahn, Executive Director of the Global Privacy and Security by Design Center, who brings a wealth of experience as Ontario's past three-term Information and Privacy Commissioner. She will be followed by Albert Fox Cahn, who is a lawyer, a technologist, a writer, and an interfaith activist, serving as the founder and executive director of the Surveillance Technology Oversight Project, or STOP, based in New York City. And last but certainly not least, Professor Ellen Goodman from a school I used to be affiliated with proudly. She's the co-director and co-founder of the Rutgers Institute for Information Policy and Law, and also is a contributor to The Guardian and Slate on these questions. She's recently written on smart cities and offers cutting-edge perspectives on artificial intelligence at the municipal level. So with that, over to you, Dr. Cahn.
Thank you very much, Sheila, and I'm delighted to be here to speak to you today about AI and smart cities. There are so many misconceptions. It's astounding. Just a little bit of my background. I recently had been retained by Sidewalk Labs here in Toronto, Canada, when they were the successful contractor to build a smart city in Toronto, which is where I live. So I was very, very pleased that they approached me to embed privacy by design into our smart city here in Toronto. I created Smart City as privacy by design many years ago, and the essence of it is it's win-win. It's not zero-sum privacy versus gains or security or anything. It's privacy and smart city, privacy and security, privacy and business interests, and multi-positive trends. But let me just backtrack for a minute. AI for smart cities. We have to embed privacy into the essence of whatever we contemplate for smart cities. So when I was working with Sidewalk Labs, I said, look, after I had studied it, what we have to do is de-identify data at source, meaning the minute the data is collected by all of the amazing amounts of technology and sensors and things that are going to prevail throughout the municipality, we have to strip it of all personal identifiers right at that time. Then you still benefit from having invaluable data, but it doesn't have the privacy risk associated with it because it's not personally identifiable. And they agreed with that right away. Until later on, they did not. And that's when I resigned and left. Now, a word about AI. I was tweeting that I was going to be doing this. And one of my lovely Twitter people emailed me back and he said, look, it would be great if in your opening statement, you'll clarify that AI stands for algorithmic inference, not artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence doesn't exist yet. And the reason I want to start with that is there's no magic to this. We've dealt with the, in the world of machine learning and deep learning, algorithmic transparency is essential so we can look under the hood and see what these algorithms are doing. We have to do that. And if we don't do that, mistakes will abound and there will be terrible unfair activities that will be taking place. The mistaken improper inferences, we have to assure that we address that. And there was another study from MIT recently that found systematic labeling errors in popular artificial intelligence benchmark data sets. I mean, the mistakes just abound, if I should say that again. So I want us to take great care to ensure that we do look under the hood, we have proper inferences are being made, as well as privacy is being respected throughout. Privacy forms the foundation of our freedom. If you value free and open societies, you value privacy. We have to ensure that it becomes an essential component of these smart cities. And it will offer enormous assistance because it will give people faith in the technologies that are being used. If we don't lead with transparency and privacy embedded into AI, it will cost municipalities dearly in terms of all the lawsuits that will abound. And I could just go on and on. We just need to ensure ethical AI. And my last comment will be this, but yet another brilliant mind wrote an article and he said, stop calling everything AI, machine learning pioneer says. There's so much we can do, but we want to make sure that another article, is your company making these common AI ethical mistakes that will cost you dearly? That's what we want to avoid. We want to build AI into municipalities, creating smart cities, and ensure that privacy prevails throughout. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Mr. Cahn.
It's very hard to speak after Anne's remarks, both because she's such an expert in the field and also because she has such a hopeful vision for this space where I feel like I am the perpetual pessimist who is here to tell you why I think that we should question whether there is a viable path forward for smart cities technologies in many of these fields. And when we talk about smart cities technologies at STOP, we take a somewhat broader conception. It's not simply about whether we're using artificial intelligence or algorithmic inference or machine learning or specific modalities of decision making, but also, are you collecting additional data as an input even for human decision making as part of this municipal infrastructure? And this is something I came to a number of years ago here in New York, when we created the first automated decision systems task force in the country, which at the time, we were quite hopeful would actually create a viable regulatory framework for the deployment and use and analysis of smart cities technology. And, while I wasn't a formal member, I had the opportunity to participate throughout. And during those conversations, what I saw was really a very challenging dynamic where we had the opacity of so much of what normally transpires in municipal procurement being made even more opaque by the additional layers of technological complexity. We saw agency capture throughout, and we oftentimes, would see these debates around what is a sufficient privacy safeguard, what is a sufficient, remedy for those who have been adversely impacted. But we didn't actually have the baseline proof that these technologies were going to help. And this is something that I always try to start off with in discussions about, artificial intelligence and smart cities technology. Do we actually know that these tools will benefit the communities in which they're used? And I think while there are plenty of examples where there is evidence supporting their deployment as beneficial, there are a lot I can point to where I think it pushes the other direction, particularly the use of smart cities technologies by police departments. And there I would point at the use of facial recognition, the use of drones, the use of predictive policing. And in that space, we've seen tools that have no actual, verifiable public safety benefits, where oftentimes the sales pitch is highly speculative to the cities where this is being deployed, but the risks and the harms are quite concrete. With facial recognition, you have a harm to democracy itself, but you also have technology that's perpetuating bias, that is prone to error, which is leading to people being wrongfully arrested and dragged away from their families and locked in jail simply because of the algorithmic errors. And so this is sort of the framing I come to this with, where we have to actually prove that there is a benefit that offsets the potential harms, and recognize that the harms are contextual, that the harms vary tremendously for different communities. Here in New York, we're dealing a lot with the rollout of the country's first vaccine passport. And one thing I've talked about a lot is, this creates a new location tracking element. And people will say, well, I don't care if I personally am tracked that way. And, for me as a privileged lawyer, as an ally, that maybe would not have a articulable harm. But for many of my clients who are undocumented, who have criminal justice involvement, who are from over-policed communities, these New Yorkers have a very different risk profile when these technologies are being deployed. Another area where we've seen the rollout of a massive amount of smart cities technologies without really any evidence of efficacy is the remote proctoring space, where we've seen a multi-billion-dollar investment by K-12 and higher education in incredibly invasive, oftentimes machine learning powered systems that are meant to detect the presence of academic fraud. And these systems have been repeatedly denounced for using biased forms of artificial intelligence. They've been, denounced for being incredibly invasive and creating new accessibility barriers to students with disabilities. But on top of that, we've seen pushback that there isn't clear evidence that these sort of systems are actually serving a pedagogical goal. And it goes back to that same framing of efficacy. And I think, as someone who comes to this from a civil rights perspective, my fear is always that when we frame systems in terms of a benefit, a utilitarian benefit versus a harm to our values, that we will always ignore the harm to our values. That is the lesson of the post 9/11 surveillance state. But where we actually holistically evaluate these systems and push back on some of the speculative claims about how ADS will benefit our cities, then we can have a much more grounded conversation. But again, I apologize for always being the most pessimistic voice in the room on these technologies. I do think there are some instances where they can be helpful, but I think on the whole, when we use this lens to evaluate them, I come away with more skepticism than optimism.
Quite understandable, in my view, but I'll come back to you on that. Professor Goodman, over to you.
Thanks so much. And first of all, I just want to thank Anne for her thought leadership and for Privacy by Design, and Albert for your incredible activism, which is, I think a model for, and most jurisdictions don't have that kind of activism, and we all need it. So I'm going to be talking about trust, and I think actually it's a point at which the optimistic and pessimistic views kind of intersect. Discussions about algorithmic inference or ADS or data-driven governance in cities often seem to run on different tracks, with some people talking about relatively mundane use cases that pose little risk to dignity, liberty, or equity. Examples like this are, prioritization of infrastructure for repair or replacement, water and gas lines, building code enforcement, traffic management, predictions about which restaurants are most likely illegally dumping grease, which is something that New York has been using predictive algorithms for a while. And then others are talking about sensitive use cases of the sort Albert highlighted, involving invasive surveillance and sensor networks, which when combined with biased AI models and opaque optimization schemes certainly do threaten human dignity, autonomy, and self-governance. Examples of these, Albert mentioned them. I'll throw in another one. Risk scores for infant mortality that focus intervention efforts on the most at-risk families and can do a huge amount of good. Cincinnati has reduced infant mortality by 25% using these, but also pose obvious risks of intervention where it's not warranted, and that can start a whole cascade of negative consequences. So we've got these mundane use cases and these sensitive use cases, and then an overlay of concerns about the role of private companies in data collection and use, the role of trade secrecy in preventing democratic accountability, the lack of public participation or even basic knowledge about what their cities are using. And what I want to suggest is that, really these all become the same conversation because they intersect at trust. And so the first thing is that mundane use cases can turn sensitive depending on data sharing and de-identification. And I'm going to offer an example of that. And then, of course, highly sensitive use cases, we recently are focusing on how they can wreck lives if poorly designed and implemented. But they can also save lives when well designed and implemented. And the problem is that suspicion born of one kind can destroy trust in the other. And to the extent that their private vendors and trade secrecy are involved, they sort of create a lack of trust that again bleeds over from one use case to another. So, and I will conclude with some suggestions about how we might, build trust in some of these technologies where they're warranted. And I very much agree with Albert that we have to insist much more rigorously on, why we need these technologies. So my first example is from San Diego last year. And I'll just call this example hiding in plain sight. In 2020, during the Black Lives Matter protests, there was already simmering anger over the city's deployment of surveillance cameras as part of a smart streetlight system. It came to light that the police department was using video captured from the vendor was GE, GE smart LED streetlights for criminal investigations and prosecutions. And the press narrative and the public perception seemed to be that the streetlights had been installed for sustainability purpose. In other words, they were a mundane use case and not for surveillance. And so there seemed to be surprise that there even were cameras on the lights. In fact, the procurement contract with GE made it clear, and this contract was public, that the lights would have cameras, that the arrangement with GE included all kinds of data analytics, both in the cloud and at the edge, locally on site. The contract provided for a number of APIs for different purposes, parking, traffic, the mundane use cases, but also public safety, and significantly more to come in the future. And so this is sort of common where municipalities will try to, air quote, future-proof their technology. And indeed, this ability to future-proof the product, its flexibility and extendability is a selling point for many procurement offices. Significantly, there was never a barrier to the police getting the data from the streetlights. In other words, the secret use of the data was a secret hiding in plain sight. But that didn't make it less shocking or less destabilizing for trust in urban governance, and for tech deployments in the future. And so the lesson I take from this is that it's not enough to have a public contract that if you dig, will alert you to creeping surveillance and data analytics. If a city is going to enter into these agreements, it should at least require public comment and an open process as Oakland does, or at the very least educate the public through sort of deep engagement about what is happening. And I think using push transparency methods, not just kind of making the contract available somewhere on a website or more likely through an open records request. Second example, I have 3 examples, but I'll stop at 2, is just up the highway in Los Angeles. And I will call, this is with Los Angeles Department of Transportation and its transit data collection. And I will call this sort of immature data governance. So the LA Department of Transportation requires micro mobility companies, scooters and bikes, to pass data about customer trips through the department, through an open API that the department has created, so that the city can better regulate the companies and uses of the streets and rights of way, right? So this is really an answer to the progressive claim that these companies are taking over the streets and are not responsible sort of to the public interest. Civil society raised concerns that we're asking the questions Anne has trained us to ask, right? Which is the data being de-identified at the source? Can this data be used to identify riders and their trips? Will it be shared with LAPD and other agencies? Will it be shared with private companies? And is it secure? Can it be hacked? After these concerns were raised, the department sort of hastily released some privacy principles that were promises, but they didn't seem to be enforceable. And I have to say that some of the civil society concern, I think was a little cynical because it was actually organized by Uber, which didn't want to send its data through the city's API. So this gets very complicated. But I think what I want to say about this is that, on the one hand, there was and may still be an opportunity here for the city to act as a data steward for its people, right? And to sort of manage this data so that it's not going straight into surveillance capitalist use, reducing company misuse of citizen data, reducing abuse of urban rights of way. But that can only happen if there is trust, if there are purpose limitations, privacy controls. Not sharing data with the police is a huge issue. Cities don't want to agree to do that. But I think that, that's really where the rubber hits the road. And so sharing agreements have to be worked out in advance and be part of a public process. So in conclusion, I guess I just want to throw out some of what I'm learning about kind of best practices if cities are going to be using these technologies. So an index of data that's collected, and I agree with Albert, a lot of this is about data collection and not necessarily about ADS. So what data are the departments collecting and integrating from data others, third parties are collecting, and what ADS systems are they using? Creating data stewards with responsibilities for responding to citizen questions and complaints, interdepartmental data sharing agreements, and also agreements, public-private agreements that are public, and make clear where the data is flowing and what the sort of security and privacy protecting measures are. Algorithmic and data audits to identify problems in a dynamic way. Serious and ongoing public engagement efforts, which I think is one of the most important things. And then, as I mentioned earlier, push transparency for procurement agreements and aggressive pushback on trade secrecy in any procurement agreement. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. So I'm going to pose some follow-up questions to each panelist and then open for questions from the audience. And so if you have a question, please feel free to raise your hand. And I'll say the questions and give you each a moment to reflect, and then I'll come back to Dr. Cavoukian. But starting with Dr. Cavoukian, you mentioned quite rightly algorithmic inferences, and then Mr. Cahn talked a little bit about the discrimination embedded in these inferences and how they come up. And I wonder if you can reflect on what a lot of people fear, right, is deeply embedded in this technology, and that is, discrimination, not just by use or in the use by police departments, but across the board. And so I'm curious about your reflection on that. Mr. Cahn, you're a pessimist, which rightly so, but one might say to you that the train has already left the station on these technologies, right? Particularly in the use of policing. But I hear you speaking as if we can halt or pull it back. And I wonder if that's right. And if the train has already left the station, what can we do now, right? I mean, these technologies are here, billions of dollars are being invested. So what's your response to that? And then I want to come back to Professor Goodman, who gave us a really thoughtful framework for the trust implications of technologies and how mundane and sensitive uses kind of implicate each other and even slip into each other. And you suggest the best practices that cities can use. And I wonder if there are particular cities that do this best, in particular, being more transparent and educating the public through deeper engagement. And I also welcome you to discuss your third example. So back to you, Doctor.
Thank you. Surveillance, there is so much surveillance that transpires through these technologies that the public is largely unaware of. Surveillance is mounting at an unbelievable rate. Trust is diminishing. There is such a trust deficit. And these are the issues we need to address. And transparency gets at a number of these issues. Someone has to look under the hood at the kind of inferences that are being made, the type of data that's being collected, who it's being shared with, usually in an unauthorized manner. Every time you dig into this, it is astounding what you can find. When I was privacy commissioner, I used to do a number of audits and things of that nature. And it's unbelievable the amount of information that is gathered and collected that the public is totally unaware of. And you don't even need it. I mean, that's what is astounding to me. It's just there so that they collect it. And then, there are certain areas that are extremely problematic. Facial recognition, for example, is one of them. People are unaware of the unbelievable error rates in facial recognition. A conservative estimate is 81% of the facial recognition matches in one-to-many comparisons are false positives, meaning they falsely identify someone as the person of interest, ruining their lives essentially until they can clear their names. When I was commissioner and I used to deal with cases of identity theft, I used to work with them and I would say, the first thing I want you to do, go to the police and file an occurrence report. So if there's a record of you claiming that your identity has been stolen, just some benchmark, and then I would work with them to try to clear their name. Anyway, facial recognition is a write-off. It should be banned. And I'm delighted in the United States, there are so many, over 30 municipality cities that are banning an outright ban on facial recognition. So all of this comes together that we have to always keep our eyes on what's taking place. I always talk about the win-win model because I am the eternal optimist because life is too hard otherwise. But what I mean by that is you make sure that what they claim to be doing is in fact the case and is worth the effort without risk to privacy. You always have to factor that into the equation. And then there are other instances where, again, the example of, Clearview AI that was slurping facial images, 3.3 billion facial images from social media. And they were selling this to law enforcement all over the world. In Canada, for God's sakes, when I heard about this, I contacted our police commissioner here in Toronto. He wasn't aware of it until he looked into his police department. They had bought the tech without alerting the chief of police. So he shut it down. And that continued across Canada. As soon as the police chiefs found out about it, they shut it down. But imagine if this hadn't been publicized, this kind of things probably goes on all the time. We have to remain alert and always look under the hood. And I just want to say one more thing for Professor Goodman, because of trust. I've started a new course called Trust by Design. So I thought you might be interested in that. Thank you.
Sounds perfect. Mr. Cahn.
Well, I think the one place where I share Anne's optimism is that I am very optimistic that we have a path forward to actually push back against the growth of these systems, because I agree. Some people do say the train has left the station. We have seen billions invested in this already. But I think the history of the American regulatory experience, particularly when it comes to state and local powers, is that it takes a critical mass of dysfunction and injustice in order to reach the level of public activation. We need to pass, legislation in response. And I think it's also true in the litigation experience. I'm thinking about how for about 40 years between the Olmstead decision and Katz, it was legal to wiretap whoever you wanted in this country without a warrant. And it took, years of just pushback and against that sort of invasiveness to get the court to actually reverse itself. And I think similarly, we will see that more and more with the third-party doctrine litigation in the space, as we already have started to with Carpenter. So I think that because some of these harms are now so concrete and no longer speculative, we're able to see the pushback. But I think that it's a narrow window, because I think that if we don't actually see a sustained and meaningful engagement from stakeholders at every level over the next 5 years, that we may reach the point where it's so baked in that we aren't able to actually take this technology out of our states and local government. And I think one of the issues here is just, it's not enough to have this sort of technical designs. Those are crucial, but we also need to have our legal systems updated to address this. And one of the things I wanted to touch on, I think Anne and Ellen both spoke to this, is sort of the ability of police and other agencies to capture data from systems that weren't originally intended for them. And the default rule in American jurisprudence is that where data is being created, it is by default a policing tool upon service of a subpoena or a warrant. That is something that we have to change. And similarly, well, I'm a huge fan of the work that's being done by localities across the country. I've been doing a lot of work to help pass these oversight bills or these bans as well. The unfortunate reality is there's under the supremacy clause, there's nothing that a locality can do today to prevent their municipal data, so long as they possess it, from being turned into a tool for immigration enforcement by ICE, so long as ICE can go to a Article 3 court and get a warrant or a subpoena. And so this is, again, I think something that's going to take a really broad federal effort, but that's only going to be possible after we see more and more states and localities passing similar protections here. And so, the other thing I want to highlight is we tend to promote deletion rather than de-identification, because one of my concerns, and there's so many different models of de-identification, I would love to hear Anne's thoughts on this, is especially with geolocation data, where the data is so intimately linked to our identity. How do you have persistent, robust, de-identification while retaining data that's actually useful for the underlying smart cities technology? That's something I've wrestled with a lot, but I know you're much more expert in that topic.
Yeah, and I want to come back to the policy discussion is really interesting in the different levels of government. I mean, one of the things that I hear from both of you is that, the data is collected at a local source, but then, local governments lose control of that data or can lose control of that data, and it can be used for other purposes, including immigration enforcement, not just policing, or captured by higher levels of government. So that's a really interesting point. But back to you, Professor Goodman, on my question about kind of which cities get this right. And it does shade into the policy question, right? Is the proper kind of locus of reform at the local level and with the kind of best practices you mentioned, or do we need to be more concerned about federal action and federal or state limits on the use of this data? Over to you.
Yeah, so, the jurisdiction I'm most familiar with and that I've been impressed with is Allegheny County, which is the Pittsburgh county. And, I'm sitting on, they have an algorithmic task force, which is quite different from New York's algorithmic task force in that, and it hasn't yet released its report. So that's a disclosure, but it's also how I'm exposed to sort of what's going on there. So first of all, I should say that it's a jurisdiction that historically has had a very sort of data forward practices. I think it's partly because of Carnegie Mellon. It's partly, in a lot of these situations, it's just contingencies of, a city had like a really good data person, 20 years ago, and they set the city on a course of being sort of very interested in data. And that was the case here. And so they have developed, again, these are sensitive, I would call these sensitive uses of data. For example, family services, a predictive algorithm that they use for triage, for intervention for neglect and abuse cases. And, one of the interesting things in this is that, sometimes, so for example, use of race as a factor in these algorithms, hugely sensitive, often misunderstood, right? And so sometimes there's kind of a reflexive view in the public that should never be used in proxies. That makes an algorithm biased, right? And now, we're kind of seeing in the, vaccine distribution context about how, right, which is a very simple algorithm that the federal government used to distribute vaccines to states, which was based on their population, right? And we've seen kind of inequitable distribution of vaccines based, on age or comorbidities that don't take other kinds of vulnerabilities into account. For example, likely exposure, essential workers, if sort of frontline worker status, those kinds of things, and race. And so, I think it's just really interesting the complexity of how these algorithms work. And so all of this Pittsburgh has been grappling with. And I think Sheila, you had asked about engagement. And so I did want to say one thing about how this task force, so far as I can tell, is thinking about engagement. So they're really going out to communities and taking input, not just with respect to particular technologies, because by then, sort of as Albert says, it's almost too late because the city is kind of already committed and are just kind of CYA going to check with the community before they implement it. And so I appreciate that what this task force is doing is reaching out to communities, even on sort of the governance framework. And one of the things that has really struck me is that they've come back and they've said, what communities want to know at the most basic level is, what is this doing for me rather than what is it doing to me? And I think that question, kind of really gets at the cost benefit, reframing the cost benefit analysis. The thing that I think may be missing, in this jurisdiction and in all jurisdictions is that, most cities don't have a stop surveillance like force. And they don't have the capability or sort of like a tech ombuds person or, a real representative who can represent the people's interests and especially marginalized communities' interests. And, I don't know how that gets done, how that gets funded, but it's desperately needed.
Great. I'm curious, and I'll come back to this because I see there's a question for Ann Cavoukian about the use of data trust and other responses to the desire for some communities to kind of control their own data. And I know this came up in the context also of Sidewalk Labs project in Toronto, but I'll come back to that because there's a question that's directed at Dr. Cavoukian, and that is that privacy by design is widely appreciated across jurisdictions when assessing how to include privacy concerns from the beginning of technology application. It has been included in the EU GDPR as well. One question the topic of discussion raises: does the privacy by design promote a higher privacy sensitivity so all the privacy concerns are captured in a given jurisdiction, or it has a case-by-case application flexibility as well?
It has a very wide reach, privacy by design. As the individual mentioned, it was included in the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation in the European Union, 2018. And since then, it's been translated into 40 languages. So it has such a presence all around the world. I mean, not a week goes by when I don't hear from some jurisdiction. And it applies. I always tell people privacy by design is all about being proactive, proactively embedding the privacy protective measures into the design and of your operations, bake it into the code, but it also applies on a case-by-case basis as well. So if you have that basic essential beginning in terms of having embedded it into the code and into your policies and operations, then when the cases arise, it's very easy to address these issues. We have many companies who have successfully applied and completed privacy by design certification. And the stories I get from them, they love it because they said it also builds such customer trust, which is really lacking. And it gives that kind of assurance that is much needed these days. But if I may, can I respond to the one question that Albert had mentioned earlier because I agree with him. So actually, before I get off of privacy by design, I'm going to get to that in a minute. I want to mention just one more thing in this context of privacy by design and smart cities. I'm working with a group called Innovate Cities, which has embedded privacy by design in its operations, and it serves as sort of a blueprint for smart cities that are contemplating how to do this. And the essential feature is privacy by design right from the beginning. Now, how do you address de-identification issues? Very clear. There's good de-identification and weak de-identification, of course. So whenever I used to speak in favor of it, I always say, look, you have to use very strong de-identification protocols combined with a risk of re-identification framework so that you can minimize the risk of re-identification to less than 0.05%. And that's a real figure. I've been working over the years with Professor Khaled El-Imam, who is brilliant in this area. He's one of the leaders, and he's now created synthetic data. And he is always successful at minimizing dramatically the risk of re-identification to less than 0.05%, which is less than the odds of being hit by lightning if you go outside when it's raining, damn good odds. So Albert, you're right. We have to have very strong protocols, but we can do this.
And from where, back to you, Albert, from where should those controls come from? Back to the level of government. Do we need stronger federal intervention here? Or can they be bottom up or at the local level?
So I think the answer is yes, and because federal regulatory intervention here is indispensable just because of the danger that federal agencies pose to a lot of the communities that are most at risk from data collection. So this gets back to the issue around ICE, the issue around federal law enforcement, and there's just such limited controls on the part of cities to rein in those practices by federal authorities. But what really terrifies me about the regulatory space over the next few years is that we're seeing such aggressive legislation and such clear-cut controls being implemented at the state and local level. We've seen that most with biometric surveillance, but we've seen it with a number of other technologies. And the concern here is that you're going to see a weak regulatory framework that preempts the stronger protections that have been done at the state and local level. And really, with these technologies, there's such a democratic accountability gap, right? As they're being deployed today, with making decisions about the lives of city residents every single day in ways that they don't fully understand, potentially having significant impacts on the trajectory of their life. And yet there isn't really that ability to speak out against that or to feel heard in that process. And so we need to come up with the structures initially at the state and local level, and I think Allegheny County is a good example of this, where people are going to actually feel like their voice is being heard in the democratic process, even when that democracy is being implemented through smart cities technologies.
Right, and I want to go to Professor Goodman. We have another question in the chat about the jurisdictional question, which level of government, et cetera. And so this person is concerned that given that in the US context, ICE has essentially a skeleton key via subpoena to access any locally collected data it likes, what are the mechanisms that cities do have to purpose bind data, particularly against appropriation by law enforcement? Is there a role for third-party data trusts? How does this question relate to the position of private companies in the municipal data supply chain? So, and if you could answer that, but let me kick it back over to Professor Goodman, because I'm particularly interested in the area that I work in. People talk about the data commons and data trust, right? Are there mechanisms to put the control with privacy, obviously, heavy privacy controls, but to put more control in a new governance structure where data is controlled not just by a private company, not just by a centralized authority, but somehow blends more community voices or control or governance in the data. So respond to that question as well as, yeah.
So the data trust idea, I really like as a concept. I haven't seen yet, sort of an implementable version of it. I mean, so Sean McDonald, whose work is great on this, is a sort of, I think, has the best thinking on this. And he took a run at the data trust proposal that was part of the Sidewalk Toronto, which was a terrible half-baked kind of data trust, like thrown out as to kind of divert attention from what was really happening. So, which is to say that I think it's, it's almost like the idea of having social media companies act as fiduciaries for our data. Like, it's a nice idea, but I don't, having who is the fiduciary here? Like, what would bind them? We need a whole set of legal of a like new law and a legal apparatus to kind of govern that. So I like the idea, but I think we're a little bit far away from it. And I also don't see how it solves the ICE problem, because they can go to the data trust, right, and get the data. Unless there were, and this gets to the tech, to the tech innovations we need that Anne would know more about. Like, is there a way to so fracture, decentralize the data, put it on blockchain or something so that like they can't get it? I don't know, but maybe that's part of the solution.
Yeah.
Sheila, if I could comment, may I?
Yes, please.
Ellen, I loved your comments, but the data trust this has to be structured. As you know, when I was with Sidewalk Labs, and they embraced privacy by design, and then they created a data trust because they were being criticized about other things. And then during the meeting, this is the only thing they didn't consult with me on, during the meeting at the first data trust meeting, they said, and of course, we'd really like you, to all the members there, to follow privacy by design. And we want you to de-identify data at source, but of course we can't make you do it. It's up to you. Well, that threw it out the window, and the next morning is when I resigned, because I knew they weren't going to implement this, and without it, I had to walk. So the good news is a serious attempt is being made by this. As I mentioned, I've joined Innovate Cities. They approached me because they said, look, we're creating this thing for smart cities. We want to bake privacy by design into the data trust and make it an essential component. And we'd like you to work with us to make that happen. So stay tuned. But you see, it has to be, I don't mean enforceable like law, but there has to be some teeth to it. It can't just be people decide to do it or not. No, you've got to find some way to entrench this into the operation.
Albert, you had something you want to say?
Yeah, I don't want to discount the possibility of data trust to work well. I've just been a little jaundiced on that idea because of the number of bad implementations I've seen floated. And one thing I wanted to highlight as another safeguard that we've seen used very robustly in recent months is litigation under existing privacy laws, targeting the private vendors that enable the federal government to collect a lot of the state and local data. The ACLU has sued Clearview AI. We've seen a number of others. My own organization, Forgive the Self-Promotion, we sued Thomson Reuters for their Clear product, which was taking utility data, mugshot data, a lot of state and local data, and selling it to ICE. So I think that novel data ownership models may play a role, but I think a lot of litigation against the commercial firms that are permitting and empowering this type of federal surveillance is also going to be crucial.
Yeah, quick follow-up question that's in the chat. Someone was still concerned about, about vulnerable communities and groups, and how we can build, if not data trust, governance frameworks that don't accept, this person says, rote arguments like synthetic data is privacy perfect when it depends on context. So anyone want to take that? Dr. Cahoukian?
You have to build this in. I mean, synthetic data has enormous attributes and a lot of strength in terms of protecting privacy, but you just don't make a statement and then that's it, and you don't revisit it. You always look under the hood. You make sure you see how it's operating. And if you detect any racial bias, you redo it. You reformulate. So nothing is just introduced and it just stays that way. Everything is a moving object these days. So I always insist upon constantly reviewing the processes, looking under the hood, making revisions, and being very open and transparent about the process.
And who does that, right, in a local government? Do we need kind of privacy officers or technology officers who are held accountable for doing this? Is that one of the innovations or best practices, Doctor?
I mean, I think I was a not bad privacy commissioner, but I know a lot of the municipalities and government people didn't like me because I was always on. To me, it's not you've got this great job. It's how you execute it. And you have to be responsible and transparent, and certainly to anyone overseeing it. Like if you have a commissioner's office or someone and they contact you, you got to be forthcoming with what you're doing. And there has to be that constant examination, audit, discussion ongoing, because it's very easy. I'm going to reveal my bias in government organizations where you just rest assured on what you've been doing in the past, and that's just going to continue. No, that can't just continue. The world is evolving like crazy. AI is emerging. You've got technology, surveillance is mounting, facial recognition. I mean, you have to constantly be on top of this.
So, and someone asked, and I'll open it up to both Professor Goodman and Mr. Cahn, that they're concerned about the lack of technical sophistication on the part of some of those in government, right? Those charged with government procurement. This is bigger than a privacy officer. It also goes to the understanding of what sorts of problem are best handled by data collection to begin with. And so back to you, Professor Goodman, because you talked about mundane and sensitive, which I thought was incredibly helpful framework. But how would you respond to this question?
Okay, so yeah, I mean, there's a lack of, the problem of lack of technical sophistication runs from the town to the federal government, and everyone, we're grappling with this about how to sort of restaff and reorganize agencies. From what I've heard from the cities and states, right? So a lot of states are also at the state level are dealing with this. From what I've heard is things are just a mess. You have, procurement is coming out of all the different departments. They don't even know, they don't know what other departments, what data they're collecting. They have like haphazard kind of sharing agreements. The sharing agreements seem to be most solid where there's kind of like there's a federal program that has kind of rules about data sharing. So those kind of seem to be somewhat systematized, but it's basically chaos with respect to what data is being collected, where it's stored, where it's flowing, and sort of the best practice. Yes, it would be great to have more. It would be great to have a ton more money and a ton more personnel and a ton more supervision. But short of that, one kind of organizational change that I've heard a lot of cities talk about is you need to have accountability up to the mayor's office, or if it's not a city with a strong mayor, then up to the manager or up to the city council, like whoever has control in the city. This function needs to be accountable to them, because otherwise they're kind of, nice talking to you, like now let us go back to our work.
So we're running out of time. Let me give you the last word, Albert.
Well, I would say that one of the most crucial things when you're looking at municipal procurement and accountability is you need someone who's outside of that procurement process, but has the political power to actually stand up to those who are making the decisions. Here in New York, the public advocate's office at the city level, the attorney general's office at the state level, these are people with their own political power base, their own, source of legitimacy and standing up to those who are making these decisions is really crucial, because I think that when you have even the best of people embedded within the agencies and within the mayor's office, it's constantly really putting them in the place where they have to choose between how many of these fights do I have the capacity to take on. And you see incredible people doing that work day in and day out, but it's not always sustainable. And so that's why they need external stakeholders who are also going to be helping with that effort.
Wonderful. Thank you all for this very rich discussion. I can't think of a better panel to have had this with. Dr. Ann Cavoukian, Albert Fox-Cahn, Professor Ellen Goodman. It was a real pleasure. I learned a lot. I'm sure the audience did. And thank you for the questions from those who asked them. Back over to you, Nicholas.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for the excellent panel. Thank you so much for moderating, Professor Foster, and to everybody who attended. Thank you for tuning in. Please tune in again on May 7th when we're going to discuss AI ethics and corporate social responsibility. And with that, I wish everybody a good weekend, hopefully pretty soon. Thank you for tuning in and have a good day. Bye-bye.